I cheated on my husband with his boss. So he emptied my bank account and left me penniless. I believe I have seriously damaged my husband's work and created problems for him in his employment. I take full responsibility for my actions, and it is undoubtedly the biggest mistake I have ever made. I cheated on my husband by giving in to a relentless temptation that crossed my path. They say that finding a wife is a blessing, but I fear that I have been far from a good discovery for my husband. I am convinced that he must harbor a strong resentment towards me at this point, and even hatred might be an understatement. I cannot even face my parents at this point. What can I say to them? I have cheated on my husband, potentially jeopardizing his career and livelihood. There is no way my parents will take me back after this. My husband did not simply seek revenge. He completely broke me emotionally and made sure I regretted my infidelity. He did not let me off the hook in any way. He left no stones unturned. Now I am beginning to realize how much I have been through, and it is astonishing. But I cannot deny that all the pain I feel is a result of the grave mistakes I've made. I am a 24-year-old entrepreneur, and I've been married to my husband Leonard. For the past 2 years, we dated for 2 years before getting married. I met Leonard when I was 20 years old, and he's considerably older, has 27. He works as a banker and is exceptionally intelligent and diligent in his work. I can't stop bragging about his work ethic. That's why the consequences of my actions are hitting me so hard now. I've realized that cheating on him is the gravest mistake I've ever made. I didn't cheat on Leonard by accident. I'd be lying if I said it was exactly how it all went down. That's why I'm filled with self-loathing right now. People do things knowingly and then regret them later, and am no different. That's why I've decided to share this significant mistake with everyone. Throughout the 2 years of my marriage to Leonard, we've been true to ourselves. We never let our work interfere with our relationship, always supporting each other. In fact, I've never met the boss Leonard's until a few months ago. Despite visiting his workplace a couple of times, he never introduced me to anyone there. I can't be the only one who isn't familiar with everyone at their spouse's workplace. Right. 7 months ago, Leonard received an invitation to his bank's end-of-year party and asked me to be his +1. I enthusiastically accepted. Because I never wanted to miss an opportunity to support him. I didn't even know that this seemingly innocent party would spell disaster for my marriage. If I had known, I would never have attended. Leonard even bought me a beautiful dress and pair of shoes for the occasion, as the color theme of the party was wine, and I didn't have anything suitable in that color. My sister, an up-and-coming makeup artist, helped me with my makeup that night. I would love to tell her, but I want to keep our identities as private as possible. When Leonard and I arrived at the party, it was an overwhelming experience. I never anticipated that an end-of-year party hosted by a bank would be as lavish as the one we attended. The atmosphere was pleasant, and Leonard wanted to introduce me properly to his colleagues. Previously, I had only visited his workplace occasionally, casually greeting anyone I met. At that point, I was eager to meet his colleagues since Leonard had shared a lot about them. He introduced me to his friends first, and they were kind and welcoming. Many of them praised my husband's intelligence, and I felt like a proud wife because they were absolutely right. Before Leonard could introduce me to his boss had something to attend to and left. Leonard and I spent our time trying cocktails and enjoying the delicious food. I even forgot the person my husband wanted me to meet. However, later at the party, his boss approached us and apologized for not being able to talk earlier. We didn't mind at all. Before I continue, I should clarify that my husband's boss is not one of the owners of the bank. He is the head of the department where my husband works. His name is Raphael, and he is 30 years old. When my husband introduced us, I didn't think much of it and didn't pay much attention to it. I noticed he held my hand a little longer than usual, but that was the only unusual thing I observed. He didn't stay with us long before leaving. My husband often talked about his colleagues, but never really bragged about his boss, so I assumed they didn't have a close relationship outside of work. We continued enjoying the night, and I didn't see Raphael again. Honestly, I even forgot that I had met him at the party. That party turned out to be incredibly insignificant, and it's not an exaggeration. Nothing remarkable happened that night. The real drama unfolded weeks after our initial encounter with him. After the party, Leonard and I returned home and discussed everything that had transpired at the event. Our typical post-event routine was days after the event. I completely forgot about the meeting and the party itself. Life resumed its usual course, and I devoted my attention to my entrepreneurial ventures. As an entrepreneur, I am always eager to explore new business ideas. I find satisfaction in making money and engaging in productive activities. One of my most exciting business ventures is co-owning a beauty salon with my best friend. One day, I had an unexpected visitor. By now, you might have guessed who it was. Raphael visited the salon. Initially, I didn't even notice or recognize him. I was busy seeing a client. However, my best friend approached me and mentioned that we had a client who claimed to know me. Intrigued, I decided to find out who she meant. To my astonishment, I saw Raphael, the boss of my salon, standing there with the young woman. It took me by surprise, and I had to do a double take because I couldn't believe my eyes. He introduced himself again and asked if I remembered him. I confirmed that I did. And that's when he requested a moment of my time. I didn't know how to react because it felt awkward to interact with my husband's boss without him present. The situation was even more awkward considering we had only met once before. When he pulled me aside to chat, he explained that someone had recommended my salon to him. I was baffled as to how he had suddenly received such a recommendation and how he knew I was the owner. My curiosity got the better of me, and I inquired about the person who had directed him to my salon. He simply mentioned that he had heard about it from my husband, who often spoke about my ownership of the salon. To be honest, the entire conversation felt awkward because I didn't know how to approach the situation with Raphael. After our awkward conversation and his emphasis on the importance of the business, he informed me that the young woman accompanying him was his niece who needed her hair done. He explained that she had been looking for a salon where she knew someone making sure her niece would stay and get her hair done. According to him, she had a tendency to be rebellious and run away when left alone in places, which is why he chose to bring her to my salon upon discovering that I was the owner. Although I found his explanation somewhat unusual, I saw no problem with looking after a teenager and agreed to make sure she stayed until he returned to pick her up after work. That was the agreement we made before he left. My best friend attended to her niece's hair while I went back to work on the client I had been seeing. Just 4 hours later, before he returned to pick up his niece expressing gratitude, I found his gratitude somewhat unexpected, since allowing someone to stay in the salon for such a duration was a common occurrence. However, I accepted his thanks and downplayed the situation as a mere coincidence. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it because it seemed insignificant. Even my best friend and I felt pleased, thinking that our salon was gaining popularity. Little did I know that what I perceived as a coincidence was far from coincidence. I wanted to express my gratitude for his patronage, so I relayed the incident. To my husband, however, he too considered it a significant matter. He explained that I had mentioned my ownership of the salon at work several times, speculating that this might have led to his boss becoming a client. He agreed to convey my gratitude on my behalf, and that was it. Life went on, and I returned to focusing on my business. As usual, however, 2 weeks later, Raphael made another unexpected visit, accompanied again by his niece. This time he expressed his intention to have his hair washed. I thanked him for returning and proceeded to wash his niece's hair as requested. Unlike the previous visit, he stayed until the hair wash was completed. I did not anticipate him staying for the entire process, assuming he had to get to work. Although I was curious, I refrained from asking, respecting his privacy and maintaining a formal demeanor due to his position as my husband's boss. After completing the hair wash, I declined to accept payment since his niece's hair was not particularly dirty and had not required extensive effort on my part. I expressed my gratitude for his visit and decided to help his niece braid her hair in 2 sections. Initially, he was hesitant to accept my kind gesture, stating that business should be conducted professionally without discounts. I insisted that I was simply helping out because her hair did not need much attention. Finally, he accepted my gesture and left with his niece. Later, my best friend sat me down and shared her suspicion that Raphael might. Having been looking for an excuse to visit me, I initially dismissed her comments as inappropriate and even felt foolish. Looking back on this situation, I find it astonishing that she found her comments uncomfortable and inappropriate. However, I ended up contradicting my own stance. Initially, my best friend approached the topic humorously without taking it too seriously. When I returned home that day, I chose not to share the encounter with my husband. I was afraid that if my best friend made light of the situation by suggesting that Raphael might be visiting him to see me and using his niece as an excuse, my husband might harbor similar thoughts. I wanted to avoid sowing unnecessary doubts in his mind. So I decided to keep the information to myself. After that day, I didn't meet Raphael again for almost a month. Honestly, I even forgot about my best friend's comments. However, when Raphael unexpectedly appeared in the living room again, I couldn't help but begin to understand what my best friend had hinted at on this particular day. She arrived without her niece and specifically asked to see me. Initially, I claimed to be busy with work due to the numerous clients at the salon. I thought I could use this excuse to get him to leave, since I felt uncomfortable having a private conversation. I told him there were a lot of clients and I was overwhelmed with work. To my surprise, he offered to wait until it was less busy. His willingness to wait took me by surprise as I hadn't expected him to be so patient. I surmised that he must also be busy with his own work and wouldn't have any free time. However, this wasn't the case. He had no problem waiting. I decided to deliberately prolong my interactions with other clients, testing whether he would eventually grow impatient and leave. But he didn't leave friends. He stayed until I had finished attending to each client's hair. My best friend urged me to make a decision, stating her earlier suspicions. He warned me to act with caution as she sensed that he had ulterior motives. His words validated the apprehension. I had been feeling confirming that something peculiar was indeed going on. I finally approached him and asked why he had come to the salon. He sensed my discomfort and noticed the awkwardness in my question. He apologized for his abrupt visit to my workplace, but he insisted it was of great importance. I can't adequately express the level of discomfort and shock I experienced as he stood before me, engaging in conversation. My best friend had already planted seeds of doubt in my mind, and I realized that what was occurring in his thoughts couldn't be anything good. He confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about me since the party. When my husband introduced us, he admitted that he was actively seeking ways to meet me again, which led him to ask around until he discovered the location of my classroom. Initially, as he began to talk, I tried to cut the conversation short and feign disinterest. I wanted to give him the opportunity to correct any misunderstandings. However, he remained steadfast in his statements, displaying unwavering confidence in his words. I felt deeply uncomfortable and didn't know how to respond. This marked the first instance since my marriage where another man had spoken to me in this manner, and the fact that he was my husband's boss added to my discomfort. I expressed my disapproval by saying that it was inappropriate for him to converse with me in this manner. I mentioned that I intended to ignore his comments and pretend I had never visited the salon that day, as I didn't want to disrespect my husband. Sadly, it seems I ended up compromising my principles even after my objection. Raphael made no effort to leave. I politely asked him to leave once again, but he refused. I eventually forced him to leave by threatening to contact my husband. He left quickly, though not before leaving me his business card. Despite the shocking turn of events and the surreal nature of the situation, I was aware that I couldn't see a positive outcome from entertaining Raphael. His obsession seemed driven by a desire to use me for his own entertainment. I had seen countless movies that portrayed such situations, and was determined not to become a victim. Therefore, it pains me even more that I finally gave in. Despite my efforts to resist, I find it difficult to recount my actions. When I returned home that day, I am fully aware that I will likely face judgment and severe criticism, and I believe I deserve it. I decided not to divulge what occurred at the salon to Leonard. My decision was based primarily on the recognition that revealing this incident would arouse suspicion. I considered it deeply embarrassing and uncomfortable, and did not want to create a hostile work environment. For him, it was then that I realized that Raphael knew perfectly well that I would not reveal his actions to Leonard due to his position as Leonard's boss at work. He understood that I would go out of my way to protect Leonard's work environment, which explained his confidence in keeping things concise. I narrated everything more succinctly. After the day Raphael revealed his intentions, he became a regular visitor to the salon, arriving weekly with remarkable consistency. Even my best friend noticed this pattern and advised me to discuss it with Leonard, but I chose to remain silent. Perhaps deep down, I secretly enjoyed his frequent visits. A fact that fills me with ashamed, I decided not to trust Leonard and continued to entertain these visits. Pretending to ignore the situation despite repeated warnings from my best friend Raphael, not only visited empty-handed, he consistently brought gifts and various objects. I cannot explain why or how this arrangement became so routine. Foolishly, less than a month after his consistent visits began, I initiated conversations with him, as he also worked weekends at the salon. Raphael would visit me during those times when I was not working. During his visits, we would engage in hours of conversation about various topics. Several weeks into his visits, he began inviting me over to his home, and unfortunately, I accepted. I never let on that Leonard had noticed anything. I am deeply ashamed of my actions and can hardly believe how low I had sunk. It was during one of these visits to Raphael's home that things escalated, and that was the moment I officially cheated on my husband. As soon as it happened, he came to his senses and hurriedly left his house. I felt such disgust with myself that I showered several times. Upon returning home, it was as if I had committed an unforgivable act, and to some extent that is the harsh reality. I cheated on my husband with his own boss, and there is no excuse that justifies my actions. I fully accept that I received the consequences I deserved after the incident at Raphael's house. I refrained from going to the salon for almost a month, blocked his number, and did my best to avoid anything related to him. Even I refrained from allowing my husband to touch me for days due to overwhelming guilt. It was a difficult time, but I recognized that I had brought it on myself. The guilt I experienced was just the beginning, and the revenge my husband eventually sought was brutal. I should have expected. No less, I recognized I had a wonderful marriage with nothing out of place. However, I kept asking myself why I did what I did. I couldn't find the reason that led me down this path I resisted for a long time, and had no intention of giving in, but sadly, I succumbed even when he started visiting the salon regularly. I convinced myself that it was a temporary distraction, a way to entertain myself. Now I realize it was merely an excuse. That led me to cheat on my husband. I gradually gave in without even realizing it. I pretended it was a passing fancy, a form of self-deception, but it was all deception. I can't keep deluding myself and pretending I didn't understand where it would lead me. Why else would I enter a man who openly admitted to having feelings for me? I'm not naive, I knew he wanted something from me, and I foolishly gave in, jeopardizing my marriage, my self-respect, and my loyalty in the process. Although I wallowed in guilt and self-pity, I never considered that my husband was fully aware of the situation. I had no idea that he knew everything that had been going on in my mind. I believed I was keeping him in the dark, thinking I would only find out the truth. When I finally worked up the courage to confess, to be completely honest, if anyone were to ask if I had really planned to confess to my husband, I would honestly admit that it never crossed my mind. I knew the truth would eventually come out one way or another, but I lacked the courage to be. I am sincere. That is why I firmly believe that I deserve the consequences of my actions continuously. I lied to his face, pretending that everything was normal. What is even more disturbing is that my husband was very much aware of the truth and discovered on his own that I had been unfaithful to him with his boss. Yes, if you are wondering how he discovered it, and how I found out that he knew, I will explain it to you as I mentioned at the beginning of this narrative. My husband is an exceptionally intelligent person, every word of which is true. He possesses a keen intelligence and a high level of awareness of his surroundings, which makes it impossible to hide anything from him. He notices, even the smallest detail, and that is how he sensed that something was wrong. Exactly 2 months ago, I was totally shocked when Leonard did something incredibly bold. You see, Leonard works as a banker, so it made sense for me to entrust my finances to the bank where he is employed. He also takes care of my taxes and handles all financial matters on my behalf, essentially managing every aspect of my finances due to his profession. When I initially married him, he was quite reckless with my spending. Not that I had a substantial income, just an average one, but he used to spend recklessly buying anything that caught my attention. However, after getting married to my husband, he started imparting the wisdom of thrift he educated me on, finances, and how to become a more responsible businesswoman. His guidance was tremendously beneficial. That's why I started entrusting him with most of my fiscal and savings matters. You can call me foolish, but there were times when I chose to trust him with my money, just in case I was tempted to spend it recklessly. I never had any worries because he had his own money, and whenever I really needed it, he would pay me back. Sometimes he would even reward me with additional funds when I managed to save a substantial amount. Never imagined that the mutual trust we shared would eventually lead to my loss. Then one day he hit me with a huge debit. As I mentioned, I run my own business, so a major portion of my income is kept in the bank. Husband knows my PIN, and as I mentioned before, he handles most of my financial matters from time to time. I would deposit money to him, and it would be stored in his account on that particular day. My entire savings were gone, practically nothing was left to me, and I felt like I was staring into an abyss. I was in the living room at the time, and I practically ran out and rushed home. I didn't need anyone to tell me what had happened to my money. There was only one person who knew my PIN, and had control over my finances, and that was my husband. My suspicions turned out to be true upon returning home. He wasn't there, so I had to wait for his arrival. When he finally returned, I confronted him about my missing money, and there, I experienced another shocking moment. My husband slapped me hard across the face, making me step back in fear. The intense anger and fury in his eyes shook me, and I can still vividly remember the sight of his anger. He shook his head slightly and spoke words that cut me like a knife, declaring that marrying me had been the worst decision of his life. Those words cut me to the bone, and I cannot convey the hatred I saw in his eyes. Leonard looked at me with absolute contempt, accusing me of being a fool, labeling me loose and stupid. I was completely stunned, unable to articulate a single word in response. My shock left me speechless, and I knew there was nothing I could say that would make any sense. He went on to reveal that he had been aware of my infidelity. For some time, yes, friends had known. For a while, he scolded me for thinking that I could cheat on him, get away with it. The level of anger I witnessed from Leonard that day was completely unfamiliar to me. I had never seen him so furious, and I never imagined he could get this upset. I was also shocked that he had found out about my affair. He explained how he had suspected something when I mentioned his boss had visited my salon. Apparently, he had a strained relationship with his boss. So when he heard that his boss had been to my salon, he began to suspect that I had secretly hired someone to keep an eye on me, and this person had been providing him with reports on my activities. Even the day I followed Raphael home, Leonard had known. I was stunned and asked him why he hadn't confronted me sooner. He admitted that he preferred to leave me in the dark, planning to take his revenge. Questioned why I hadn't intervened before Raphael and I took our relationship to the next level, Leonard replied that he didn't care what I did. He wanted to know if I would remain loyal to him, and he already had his answer. He then dropped a bombshell declaring that all the money I had saved with him and the funds in his bank were now his. I couldn't believe my ears. Leonard remained steadfast even when I pleaded with him. I realized that my best friend also had her money in his bank, and I knew she would soon come to claim it. It felt as if the entire world had stopped in its tracks, and I found myself in the middle of total chaos. Before I could gather my thoughts, Leonard placed the divorce papers on the table. I could clearly see that he had already signed the divorce papers. I felt helpless, acknowledging the consequences of my actions. I begged Leonard for forgiveness, expressing deep remorse for everything I had done to hurt him. However, Leonard made it clear that he would never grant me the satisfaction of forgiveness. To make matters worse, he demanded that I vacate the house. Immediately, I had nowhere else to go and was financially compromised, but he showed no concern. Despite a tumultuous day, I mustered up the courage to inquire about the situation at his workplace. Leonard looked me in the eye and declared that he would not take any action. I believed that it was not worth risking his job for me. However, I suspected that he might be lying. Knowing that he would likely take some action, I was worried about the impact on his career, because men tend to have their pride and rarely let such matters go. I felt immense guilt, and the thought of him losing his job over me weighed heavily on me. Leonard made it unequivocally clear that it had been a stupid mistake. Those were his parting words before removing me from the house. It's been 2 months, and I find myself wallowing in self-pity. Surprisingly, Raphael never contacted me. Even though you probably heard what happened, rumors are spreading like wildfire, and I'm sure the whole town is in on the truth. I realized I had inadvertently become a pawn in his game. I was having problems at work with my husband, and he decided to use me as a means to provoke him. I was naive enough to fall for it and end up as collateral damage.